All right. So, welcome to another episode of Leaving a Rich Legacy. I'm so excited to have my friend Constance join us
Hello.
today. When I think about legacy and like breaking generational patterns, I remember like you making some really, really big decisions in your life where you stepped out on faith, which is not considered the norm for our community, especially when you think about success and what's considered to be successful by society. So I wanted to have you here to share your story. I do want at some point us to talk about how we became friends because I think that is important that
Very.
people understand the backstory of our friendship. But I want this to be about you today. And it's really reflecting on your life, the things that you've accomplished, and really like the last 10 years and
Mhm.
what that looks like for you. So super excited to have you here. And I want to just open up and ask that you share a little bit about yourself, Constance. Who's Constance?
That's a tough question. Used to be rather. I've become more comfortable with it. But thank you, Jessica, for giving me an opportunity to share my story on a platform to be shared with others, because I do believe that ultimately our stories are not just for us. And when you ask me who I am, that has changed over the years, what I started with. So today I can say I'm a Christian, I am a philanthropist, I'm a writer, I am a wife, I am a stepmom, I'm a grandmother, I am an insurance professional. I think that pretty much sums it up.
Okay. Wow. All of those things that you
Yes.
now are and you've embraced. And like you said, over the years, it's changed. And I think that's a good point to call out that
Mhm.
we aren't who were 3 years ago or
Not
five
at
years
all.
ago. And I think sometimes we don't realize that it's okay that that changes over
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
So, okay, so you're your wife, you are a stepmom, you got grandbabies,
Yes.
and you're also insurance professional. You're also a writer, which you write very well. You've written for me before.
Thank you.
But you're also an entrepreneur and you're
Mhm.
super, super passionate about like helping men get back into the workforce. And I think that's really driven your passion and purpose.
Yes.
So you made a decision about 7 years ago
Mhm.
to leave a career where you were in management, you were traveling, you
Yes.
lived in Dallas, you had a beautiful home, beautiful car, just everything, right? People are like, she is doing it.
Yes.
And you took a leap of faith to leave after,
Mhm.
I think it was for the 16, 17 years that you have been with the company?
18 at the time.
18. Okay.
Mhm.
How did you get there where you say after 18 years, I'm going to leave?
So I have to admit, me leading with I'm a Christian was intentional, because I did not leave my corporate career. God led me to leave. And had it not been for the spiritual connection I have with God, certainly I would not have gone anywhere. I finally reached a place where I was making the salary I wanted, I had the job I wanted. As you mentioned, I was traveling up to 50% of the time, which I love, at someone else's expense, so I had it all. If there is such a thing, but it became uncomfortable for me. And when I say uncomfortable, not necessarily in the role, but at home, which was very odd. So, you know how we all have patterns, and I am one that I go to bed early. I wake early, but I go to bed early. And when I say early, I mean 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock on what I consider a grown and sexy night. But I started to first, my sleep patterns were interrupted, and they were interrupted by God speaking to me, letting me know that it was time for me to shift, time for me to change. And the first night, I'll never forget it. It was like 1 in the morning, and I could not go to sleep. I was like, what is going on? Why am I not sleepy, or why am I restless? And God spoke to me and said, I've allowed you to pursue everything you told me you wanted. I actually had a number as far as the salary I wanted to make. God did that. I told him that I loved travel and I wanted a career that would allow me to do so. God did that. I was living in Dallas, Texas, as you mentioned. I loved Dallas, Carrollton, Texas, as a matter of fact. I loved living there. I had a home. So everything I wanted God to do for me, he did. So he reminded me of that. And he said, now I need you to leave those things that you wanted to pursue my will. I've given you yours. I need you to pursue my will. And initially, as you mentioned, culturally, we just don't do that. And I was like, nah, he can't mean he's not talking to me, because I know he didn't tell me to leave this job. And it was a well sought after job. It was a completely new department. And so it was extremely competitive. You know, I felt like me winning that position, earning that spot, I felt good about what I'd accomplished. So God telling me to leave that was totally outside of the norm. He told me that night, of course, being the human, imperfect person I am, I didn't listen. And he had to wake me up several nights. And finally, the last time I was awakened in the middle of the night, unable to go back to sleep, I grabbed my laptop and I typed my resignation. I didn't have a date because God had not given me a date yet, but I knew I needed to be obedient so I could sleep, for one, you know. And then secondly, of course, you know, a job, material things, a position, even a relationship you're in. If God is not at the center of it, then it won't last. And if God is not at the center of it, you won't be successful. So at that point, I became more concerned with God not being with me in the position than me leaving the position itself. But I typed up my resignation and I said, okay, God, I've typed it up, because I talk to God like I'm talking to you here. So you let me know when it's time for me to share this with my leadership, because I definitely didn't want to share it prematurely. And I was nervous. You know, I should even share that with God. You know, I'm terrified to do this. I have bills, grown folks' bills, Jessica. And my mom had already told me after I reached a certain status, she was just like, hey, I'm very proud of you, but I need you to know, when you were living in that apartment, mom and daddy could help you. Now that you have accumulated all this other stuff, we don't got you. So you're going to have to figure it out. So I had that in the back of my mind, but I knew that I could trust God, because ultimately he is the provider for all of us, right? Even my parents, you know, I couldn't rely on them because they should be relying on God themselves. But I typed out my resignation. One day I had a monthly meeting with my manager, and we sat down in the meeting. We talked about what I was doing well, what I needed to improve upon, and the meeting went well. At the end of the meeting, she said something to me that let me know it was time for me to share what God had given me. She said, Constance, you know, we've talked about a lot here and I've led a lot of the meeting. Is there anything you want to share with me? I sat back in my chair. I said, actually, there is. And I told her that I appreciated her leadership and what I was about to say. I didn't think that I would feel comfortable enough to share it with any other leader but her. So I was glad that the timing was what it is, or what it was at the time. And I told her I'm going to have to leave. I said, I don't like to live my life with regret. And there are some things that have been very heavy on my heart I need to pursue. And those things require me to leave this position. As you can imagine, she was shocked, you know, because I've had no complaints about the job. And she wanted to make sure that it wasn't something that happened and perhaps I failed to share it. I said, absolutely not. You know, I love having you as a leader. I love the job I'm in. It's just, I have to go. You know, there's nothing else I can say to explain it. I have to leave. And she said, well, I'd hate to see you go. But she wanted to know when, you know, she wanted to prepare for my exit. And I told her, I don't necessarily have a date yet. And I don't want you to share this with your leadership team until I have a date. But I didn't want to not share with you so that you wouldn't have the opportunity to process this like I've had. So I wanted to give you that courtesy. And I told her when I had a date, I would come back and let her know. And a couple of weeks after that, I had a date, which was about 4 or 5 weeks out. So it was beyond the 2-week requirement. And I shared the date with her and told her at that time that she could share with her leadership in preparation so that they could post the position. I told her I didn't want a fanfare, so I asked her not to share with my peers until I was ready to share with them. That's how it happened.
I didn't know that you shared with her
Mhm,
like before you actually had the date.
mhm.
So that's something that is new for me. I
Yeah.
knew that you gave them advance notice,
Mhm,
but I did not realize that. So wow, to even be able to share that, be so confident in the decision
mhm.
that you share it without having a date. That speaks volumes.
Yes.
Um, do you have any regrets,
Zero.
leaving?
Can
Good.
I say negative zero? Negative. During the time, it was, as you mentioned, an incredible leap of faith for me. I had never done anything like that before, but the reliance upon God for everything, every day, provision in every way, I cannot underestimate the value of that. I can't underestimate it, or overestimate it rather, because it was incredible. During that, it was 18 months. Let me just go ahead and put that out there. It was not a short period of time. I'd stayed for 6 months. And had God positioned me in my next job during that 6 month period, perhaps I would not have given him the credit he deserves. And I would have thought that I had something to do with it because I prepared for it. So he made sure that it extended beyond the period that I had myself, so that I had to fully rely upon him and fully give him credit for bringing me through that period. But through the 18 months, I volunteered with a nonprofit, Miles of Freedom, for an entire year. And they make sure that reentry services are provided for those recently released from prison, the directly impacted people and family members of those who've been incarcerated. And I learned so much from the founder, Richard Miles, because he too was incarcerated and a product of reentry services and criminal justice reform that was needed all over the country at this point. Also, I became a foster mom, and that's something I always wanted to do. I didn't have biological kids of my own at the time and still don't, but I wanted to nurture children, and I felt like the foster care system was an opportunity for me to do that. I served on the grand jury for the county of Dallas for about 3 months consecutively. And that too was an experience, didn't know I needed, but it has helped me to be able to understand how the system works. I knew how someone got to the place of incarceration. I knew what happened after they were incarcerated because I'd volunteered for those services too. What I didn't understand was the legality of it. What happens between someone getting accused of a crime and going to an actual trial? That was a gap for me. So God filled that. I was able to travel. I went to Morocco for my birthday during that period. And I'd never gone to Morocco before, and I went alone. So God funded that. I remember one of my friends saying, "How are you able to go to Africa and you're not even working? And I'm working every single day and I can't go." And the only response I had for people who were amazed at all of the things God was doing in my life was, "It's God." And now, don't get me, I don't want to make it seem like this was a really smooth, easy process. I will say that the transition was smooth, but it was not easy because I continued to get in my own way, and I needed God to continually remind me who He is. And so there were some things that he required of me to make sure that I was fully dependent on him. And one of those things was at 5:30 every morning, because I told myself I'm not going to set an alarm clock. I've been setting an alarm clock for 18 years. And so I'm like, I'll wake up when the spirit moves me. And at 5:30 every morning, like clockwork, my eyes would pop open and I would go downstairs. I'd journal. And at the end of my journaling or listening to an inspirational message or song, I'd say, all right, Lord, what are we doing today? And I became very comfortable with that. It was actually liberating because I knew that I didn't lead myself to the place I was in. So obviously God had a plan for me and I was more than willing to follow his plan.
I got to see that firsthand. So
Yes.
I think that, I'm glad you said that it was a smooth transition, but it wasn't
Mhm.
easy because there were
Mhm.
things, but you absolutely live life. You made adjustments based on, that you were not working, but you still live life. You still had a home.
Yes.
You still had a vehicle, you still could enjoy things. Now, you prepared yourself, right? You were
Yeah.
financially responsible, which I have learned so much from you about financial responsibility and being debt free. There's so many things, but you did a lot of work too, where
Yeah.
God played a part in it. But I wanted to make sure we captured the piece about like your work with Richard, and then
Mhm.
also what you're passionate about, because do you think that played a part in your decision and God leading you to leave corporate America at the time?
Yes, I do think it played a part because I'll say this passion of mine started well before I even knew what a passion was. My bachelor's degree is in justice studies slash criminal justice. The name was changed before I actually graduated. But so I've always wanted to know what goes on in an offender's mind first to make that person want to offend. That's how I thought in my teens, 20s. There must be something going on in their head. So it kind of was more psychological, I think. But as I matured, I worked for 4 years in a prison, 2 years in a male prison, and 1.5 to 2 years in a female institution. So I learned a lot. I learned that not everyone who is convicted of a crime, one, actually committed the crime, and two, are bad people. So I learned that it could have been me. It could have been the people that I affiliate myself with on a daily basis. I could have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or I could have been just going through a rough period and decided to make some decisions that were not good for me. So I learned a lot during that period. And when you ask about the passion, the fact that God led me back to that place, I've been volunteering in an institution, several institutions, and I thought that was enough. I thought, oh, that's the philanthropy part of me. I'll give money to the organizations I believe in. I'll volunteer my time. That'll do it. And I can be over here on the side living my life. And God was like, nope, not enough for me. You're here for a greater purpose. Yes, you can do that. But what I learned was when I volunteered with Richard for a year at Miles of Freedom, I was able to transfer some of the skills learned in corporate America to his organization. And I'm very proud of the work he and I were able to do together.
Good. Ooh, look at those transferable skills. See, they don't have to
Yes,
stay just within corporate America.
correct.
Um, okay, so during your time so you talked about 18 months, just for clarification,
Mhm.
18 months was the time where you left corporate America until you started a new job or you found a new
Correct.
job? Okay.
Yes.
Talk about those 18 months for us. So you're getting up at 5:30 without an alarm. Lord, I'm not quite there yet. So if you want to get me there, help me out. So you're getting up, you have this routine, which is so important. I love
Mhm.
it that you
Mhm.
had this routine. But what about some of the other things that happened between that time that people thought was all beautiful and glowing and the traveling, but some of those struggles
Mhm.
or the things that occurred that was not of the norm of what people would expect of you that you actually
Mhm.
did?
So a couple of things. One, it completely removed me from who I thought I was. I'm a planner at heart. I like to know. I don't even like surprises, good or bad. I just want to know. They give me a little bit of anxiety. But it pulled me away from that. So much so, I had no plan because I didn't know how I was supposed to return to what I thought was my dream, my standard of living. So each month, for the first 3 months, I'll say, I kept up with the pay periods for the job I left. And every 2 weeks, I would wake up, I'd check my phone for the direct deposit that was not there. So that was the first thing. No one saw that, but I did it for 3 months. And finally, I think God matured me enough to where I stopped looking for it and I stopped keeping up with the timing. That was really torturing myself, looking for something I knew wasn't going to be there. I hadn't worked, so why would I be expecting a check from that employer? But so that was one thing. Another thing is just the back and forth. I felt, and I'll never forget the first weekend after I quit, because I quit on a Friday, and I've learned about myself. Every time I make a major decision, I run home. So I'd already planned a trip to return to Soperton, Georgia, which is my hometown, to stay at my parents'. There's something about my childhood bedroom that brings me comfort. So I quit that Friday. I drove down to Soperton, Georgia that Saturday, and I stayed for maybe a week or two. And after a couple of nights there, I remember getting up one morning and my mom, who's retired now, she said, you're the most peaceful, unemployed person I've ever seen. Like, how are you sleeping at night knowing you don't have a job? So we talked through that, and I said, I can't explain it. I just know I did the right thing. And I also want to make a very valid point. I did not tell my parents what I was going to do until I did it. And the reason why is because I knew I would get pushback, and not because they don't trust the same God I do, but because as a parent, they want to be my protectors. And I eventually had to tell my mom, it's not doing me any good for you to ask me every couple of months or so if I found a job. No, I'm not looking, for one, because I have not been led to look. And two, I'm relying on my faith. And if you don't have it, that's fine, but I need you not to shake mine. So I had to come to the point where I set a few boundaries, because my mom wasn't the only one. There were friends who would ask me regularly, did you find a new job yet? And it would give me anxiety. So just be careful about who you share God's plans with, because sometimes if you don't talk yourself out of it, people you respect and admire will cause your faith to shake as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good on both parts about friends.
Mm-hmm.
And also, sometimes people project their own insecurities
Yes.
or lack of faith. And they will cause you to do the same because of whatever they're having going on or lack of relationship with God. So your mom and your dad, so your parents are like, what in the world is she doing?
Yes.
And you think about it, like to someone else, you had the perfect life.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you think about where you're from and the outside looking in, they're like, she is doing it. And then here you go and you're unemployed. And like, all right, now we're gonna follow her. But thinking about generational patterns, and I know that you have also done some self-development work with therapy. We are taught and conditioned that we're supposed to get the job and stay for the job until you retire. And that's what life looks like. But you have changed that for not only for yourself, but I would like to say for me and others around you, for your family specifically. Do you think that you've had an impact on that moving forward for your sisters, your nieces, your nephews, even your stepchildren, now that you've paved the way and you changed the pattern of what the generation before us knew?
Yes, I definitely believe that God has allowed my story to impact others, because they were able to witness during that time. Like you mentioned, you were able to witness, who I was becoming, the things that I was experiencing during that time. And I think that's probably something I underestimated, the impact. I thought I was doing it just for me so that I could strengthen my faith and build a close relationship with God, which I did. But he was also using my story to increase the faith of other people in my proximity, close proximity. After I left, and probably a couple of years, even so, after, there were at least 3 people who also made a leap of faith. And they reached out to me to let me know how inspiring I'd been. And watching me through my journey encouraged them to take the leap themselves. So I'm extremely grateful that God chose me, Jessica. And even the platform you're providing here, I haven't spoken about this in quite some time. I think about it often. And every now and again, one of my friends or family may bring it up, or maybe when I'm reflecting on it and thinking about how loyal I was to a company, not necessarily to God, and how he had to change that so that my loyalty rests with him, not the company I was working for. I love the fact that you provided a platform for me to now share, because it has forced me to also reflect again. And hopefully a whole new generation of people can be inspired by my story just listening to your podcast. When you talk about generationally, I think I helped to increase even my parents' faith. And my dad's a pastor and my mom's a first lady, but they're human. So everyone's level of faith is different. Sometimes it's based on your personal experiences. Sometimes it's based on your exposure to others. So God allowed me to help to increase their faith when it comes to walking away from what they considered a good job, And I just believe that my nieces and nephews, whom I love and work tirelessly to try to expose to things that I didn't think I was exposed to at their age, I talk to them very candidly about who I am, who I used to be, what I'd love to achieve. I dream big, and I share those dreams with my nieces and nephews. But yes, they now know that, one, they don't have to work for anyone if they don't choose to. And two, if they choose to work for someone else, they are valuable. They can set their price. They can work hard and expect to be paid well for the hard work. So yes, I definitely believe that I've impacted not only my generation, the generation before me, but the one behind me.
So when you think about, you talked about being so loyal to a company, you recently had mentioned through this process, you learned to bet on yourself and be loyal to yourself. What does that mean to you? When you said it, I was like, I'm going to bring this up. I didn't ask you to elaborate on it, but I caught it, that you said it. And like thinking about that, what does that really mean to you to learn to bet on yourself?
Confidence. I no longer rely on an organization to develop myself. Of course, there are things within an organization that you can use to improve your skill set, but if they don't provide what you feel you need, it's okay to go get it yourself. I've joined an organization that helps me to network with other business professionals in the insurance industry who look like me. I don't have that at my current job. I've allowed myself to take weekends sometimes to attend a women's empowerment or improvement call. That's not something I get paid for. I've enlisted the help of a career coach. I've never had that before. I've always had a mentor, but I never had a career coach, and one that's outside of the industry I currently work in. That was important to me as well, because I wanted to make sure, we talked about transferable skills. I wanted to make sure that those transferable skills transfer even outside of the world of insurance, and I can still be successful if that's where God led me to. So just making sure that your personal development is just that, personal. And your professional development is still personal because it's yours. And I'll never rely on a company to provide for me everything I think I need, because there's no way they can know everything as an individual I need in order to feel comfortable, to feel valuable, to feel as though I am making progress, there's no way they would know that. So I bet on myself because only I can know exactly what I need.
That's good. And that speaks to knowing like the value that you bring and self-worth. And even though a company may not recognize you or reward you for the work that you've done or what you're contributing, as long as you know that you can develop and prepare yourself for other opportunities, whether that's being an entrepreneur or
Yes.
going into different industries or the same industry.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So you 18 months, you are one with yourself, you're
Mm-hmm.
traveling, you were a foster mom, work with Richard, you had your
Mm-hmm.
time. Also with the trial,
Mm-hmm.
working as on a jury for multiple
Mm-hmm.
cases. And when you think about just even the last 5 to 10 years, but just how you transition, because even you moving from Dallas, right? Moving to Dallas
Yes.
and everything that happened, how has that helped you become the woman you are today in your professional and personal life? Like, how do you think it contributed to it?
In so many ways, Jessica, it's hard to pinpoint each way because I feel like I identify new ways each time I think about this. But professionally, I will say it changed my mindset to the point where I look for specific things within an organization that will help me to be successful, for one, and two, to get what I need in the way of not just professional, but my personal desires. Um, it's important to me that representation is present in the organizations I work. And where there isn't, I seize the opportunity to try to influence some of those decisions. Another thing is personally, um, it changed who I am or who I was and made me into the person I am. One of the things that I remember, one of the hardest challenges when I left was meeting new people. And the reason why that brought so much anxiety is because I didn't realize how often people ask, "What do you do?" when they meet you. And every time someone asked me that question, I had to admit that I did not have a career at the time. And it was embarrassing the first few times because I felt as though I wasn't successful, accomplished, and that someone would perhaps view me as a person who was lazy, a person who was not very motivated or driven. And that's not who I was. So I didn't want them to get the idea that I was haphazardly just living life, you know? And so that was the first thing that probably came to me. And I had to change. That's why when you asked me who Constance is at the beginning of this podcast, I told you that has changed. And I used to lead with what I did. Now I lead with who I am, because those are the things that I'm most proud of. Being an insurance professional and being successful in that career is great. It's an accomplishment. And yes, I give myself permission to celebrate myself in that. But at the end of the day, that's not what I'm most proud of. So I lead with those things, the God-given talent I believe God has given me, the God-given relationships and connections I believe God has given me, so that I can complete the assignment He placed me on earth to complete.
Okay. What you said kind of just resonated two different things with me that I want to touch on. So
Mm-hmm.
I love that you have learned to define who you are outside of accomplishments based
Mm-hmm.
on somebody else's standard.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I say that is, one of the things that I talk about with some of my clients with coaching is identify accomplishments outside of work and school. Like, what are you most proud of? Because society, especially I feel like for Black women, we have been conditioned that success is based on the degrees, the certifications,
Mhm.
your career. And unfortunately, we don't recognize the other things that we do well and are
Mhm.
wonderful and that we should lead with. So I love that you said that, and you are now at a place where you can do that, because that is one thing that I specifically tell my clients, like, think about what you are accomplished outside of all those things
Correct.
and like sit in that, because you don't recognize those. And then two, when I think about as a single woman and speaking to single men, a lot of times they talk about, well, women, when I meet them, they want to tell me they did all these things.
Mhm.
And it goes back to, that's what we've been taught. Like, you got to do these things. So when you meet me or you meet women, they may start with all of those things, not
Yes.
to brag,
Mhm.
but that has been who they have been taught to
Yeah.
defines who they are.
Yeah.
So I
It's
hope that,
conditioning for sure.
yeah, it's
Mhm.
conditioning, and it's not considered bragging or trying to be little, or it's just
Mhm.
because that's all they know and that's all they've been
Yes.
taught since they were kids. So love that you talked about both of those. All right. So you're a planner. I'm a planner too. So you're a planner, and
Mhm.
now you have learned to like be free and just not be so
I'm
set
still
on a
learning.
schedule. You're still learning. But I think that you've shown great progress when you
Yes.
think about, I want to bring up your birthday. So you turned
Yeah.
50 last year,
Yes, I did.
and I came to Jacksonville to visit,
Mhm.
and you
Mhm.
were like, we don't have an agenda. And I'm like, we
Correct.
don't? Um, okay.
Mhm.
But the one thing that I shared with you, and I wrote a post because I just loved it. It's like there was like this very childlike
Mhm.
spirit that you had. Not that you were acting childish, but you were
Mhm.
so carefree. We did bubbles, we walked by the lake. I think we
Yes.
had ice cream. There
Yeah.
was just like this energy about you that was so free spirited, which I always think you was a free spirit anyway. I'm gonna say that.
Mhm.
Like, you just always have that energy, but it was something that was different.
Mhm.
Do you feel like you noticed that difference like over the last year or so? Or do you know what I'm talking about? Like, did you
Absolutely.
recognize the same thing, and how did you get there? Because I think a lot of people at 36, my age, at 50, at 70, don't know how to tap into that. So how did you get there?
Mhm. I definitely recognize the change. And as you mentioned, yes, I think naturally I'm pretty free spirited, but it is different now. By a long shot, it's different. And I was able to tap into that during my transitional period. The 18 months, God removed me from corporate America and allowed me to rely solely on Him. As you mentioned also, I was living my life, but not having income coming in. I needed to be very financially responsible with the income I had already. And so I learned to enjoy things that did not require money. And you mentioned the bubbles. That's part of my self care routine. When I'm feeling anxious, when I'm sad, even sometimes when I'm happy, I reach for my bubbles. Bubbles cost a minimal amount and provide me with so much happiness. It's invaluable. I can't even place a value on it. So the bubbles that you saw me blowing and chasing after when you came to visit me in Jacksonville, that was part of the tapping into what do I like, regardless of what it costs. Because, some of us, everyone has their thing. Some folks like bags, some folks like shoes. I don't necessarily care for either of those things, but I love travel. But in the mix of trying to do things that I thought spoke to and provided the positive mental health that I believe is so important for us going through day to day challenges. I needed to find things that were inexpensive. I needed to find things that didn't cost anything at all, which is why going by some body of water, even exercising, walking, riding a bike, those are things that don't cost anything, but allow me an opportunity to reset. So yes, the childlike activities you witnessed, and thank you so much. You even agreed to partake in some of that with me, some of my foolishness. But we had a good time, and we didn't have an agenda, as you mentioned. We went by a coffee shop. I'm not a coffee drinker, but it was my birthday, so I wanted to do something outside of the norm. So I had a drink, I had a Danish, was able to explore downtown Jacksonville, which I hadn't done much of prior to you coming to town. So those are things that I look for now. What makes me happy sometimes is something that costs money, but I also know that there's incredible value in things that cost absolutely nothing but my time and energy.
Yeah. Yeah, we did. As you were speaking, I remember almost falling off that bike. Hadn't been on a bike in years. Everybody on Facebook, like, did you get a video? No. We did
Exactly.
not
It
have a
didn't
video. But yeah, no, we did. We did have a good time. And, of course, that's one thing I miss about you being in Dallas. Like, you are my workout buddy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we would get up. We went to Crunch Fitness at 4:30 a.m.
Yes, very early in the
We
morning.
would get up. So I definitely know that I miss those things about you being here, but it was good to explore Jacksonville, because I
Yes.
didn't do that when I lived there as well.
Mhm.
Okay, so now you realize you're tapping into this energy.
Mhm.
You're working on not being so much a planner,
Yes.
and you also know like what happiness looks like without spending money. You mentioned self-care and talked about a little bit about therapy. So I'm a huge advocate for both.
Mhm.
And I know that, you have learned the importance is for both as well. So what does
Correct.
like self-care look like for you? And also, if you could kind of share like how has therapy benefited you as well? Because I still think in our community, there's this hesitation to trust someone at a therapy level.
Correct. So self-care for me means so many different things. As I mentioned, from the inexpensive to the expensive, my bubbles would be on the inexpensive side of things, and my international travel would be on the expensive side of things. I just listened to myself. This morning, my self-care was lying in bed, grabbing my journal, and jotting down my thoughts. Um, Later today, it will mean attending a Christmas party with my best friend. So it just depends on the day. When I get back home to Jacksonville, I'm sure it will entail spending quality time with my husband. So sometimes self-care is something I do alone. And sometimes it's something I do with the people I love. But no mistake about it, whether you're by yourself or with a group of people, if you're doing it for you, then it's self-care.
Love it. Okay. And we do talk about that self-care, and it looks different for both of us, and
Mhm,
that's perfectly
mhm.
okay. Um, Now, therapy.
Yes.
Talk about doing the self-work outside of work. But how has therapy helped Constance? Like, what have been the benefits? Because you're a very open person about,
Yeah.
what you're going through, and you're not afraid to put the mirror up and look at yourself. So,
Mhm.
how has therapy helped you?
One is a therapist provided accountability for me. Some folks are like, I don't need a therapist. Why do I need to pay somebody to talk to? I have friends for that. One, your friends have their own issues. And two, most of the time, because they are your friends, they can be biased. So I needed someone who could, one, devote the time to me consistently and allow me to speak my truth without fear of judgment, without fear of ever hearing it again, regardless of what I was talking about, and helping me to work through the whys. I'm very comfortable talking about what I feel, but before therapy, I was not comfortable, nor did I correlate what I feel with past experiences, what I feel with fears that I currently have, what I feel was not correlated with who I'd like to be, who I think I am, how I think others see me. A therapist helped me to realize all of those things. And she was also able to hold me accountable for the things I said I wanted. You know, sometimes I remember talking one time about being fearful about not being able to make sure that in my death, the people I love are taken care of. So she said, "Oh, you're fearful of that. That's nice. Do you have a will?" And I said, "No." And she was like, "Well, you can fix that. You're fearful about something you actually have control over." So I enlisted the help of an estate planner, and now I have a will. So that's no longer a fear because I know that I've put things in place that will help me to find peace in knowing that when my assignment here is over, the people I love will have something to remember me by, and they'll be able to enjoy some of the resources and blessings that God has gifted me with, and I can pass down to the next generation.
Legacy. And I'm glad you brought up the will
Mhm,
because it's so important. I'm not just gonna say in our community, but you know, even going through, and I know you went through some of this stuff with insurance, like how,
mhm.
the white community leaves legacy
Yeah.
for their
Mhm.
families through insurance and, their retirement, how they prepare
Mhm.
so if they do pass away, they can leave it. And you also prompted me to get a will. So I have one in place. I don't have children, but my nieces and nephews will receive something that I
Mhm.
hope that it continues on through the generations, that we set the next generation up for success. So I'm glad you
Yes.
mentioned that. All
Yes.
right. So last question, I got two, but the last question I have really for you is, what does peace look like for Constance?
Oh, peace, just the word itself brings peace to me. But it looks like no concern for public opinion or freedom from being so pressed by public opinion that you don't do the things you know you were put on earth to do. And when I talk about public opinion, I'm talking about people who either don't know you at all or know very little about you. Not saying that you shouldn't consult with people you actually respect, people who actually love you. No, those aren't considered the folks I consider would be public. But in this day and age, you know how we're in a society where social media plays such a part in seeking validation, gaining validation from others. And peace looks like not um, requiring that validation for me to feel validated. That's what peace looks like.
Okay. And is there anything else that you would like to share? When I think about when you first left the company, so we were in the same building. I think you were on the third floor, I was on the second floor. And I remember so many people just was like, I'm so happy for her. I wish I could do it.
Mhm.
And I know you heard the same. So, do you have any advice for anyone who may be struggling with taking a leap of faith or trusting God to make a decision and, just working through that?
Mhm. Yes, one is make sure it's God, you know, and you'll know most of the time God requires we do things that we don't have the courage to on our own. So that's the first thing. Make sure it's Him. And secondly, continue to seek Him. Share with Him your fear of doing what He's led you to do. Ask Him to lead you, ask Him to guide you. Be willing to put in some work on your own. Show Him that He can trust you. I've said often to some of my friends, because I'm I'm very intent on being financially literate, responsible with the blessings God has given me. I often remind God, you can trust me with the money. You can trust me with the money. I say that sometimes just driving down the street. You can trust me with the money, because I need him to know from my heart that I trust him with every resource he has given me, because I know that all good things come from him. After that leap of faith and seeing the provision he had for me, seeing the impact that he allowed to happen as a result, seeing the growth and development in me he provided, I've taken several other leaps since then, I'll say. So one, you'll know when it's God, and be obedient, act when he leads you to act. And with that leap, once you complete that task, rest assured there will be others, because as long as you are living and as long as there is work to be done here on earth, God is going to need people to do it. That's the whole purpose of us being here. At the point God no longer needs your service, then it's time, your time is up. Your time is up. So just know that as long as you're here, there's a purpose for you, and there's a plan for you. God's plan doesn't have to be yours. Just be obedient and rest in that.
Yes, I think you might have been speaking to me too.
Take
love
it.
go back and listen to that part. But yes, no, I'm super excited that you can share your story and hopefully inspire someone else to take the leap of faith, to trust, when God has given them direction for the plans. And then also, like you said, you don't have to share what you're doing with everyone. Sometimes we have to move in silence, because people will not understand what we do, why we're doing it, and they feel like they should have an input. So you definitely need those boundaries. So I thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to having you back, because I do think it is so important for people to learn about my relationships with my friends.
Yes.
How they came about, because there's all the stories are different. I think we have a very unique story that people people will probably never, realize that's how we started. And I won't get into it, but I do want to have you back to share that, because I want people to see that other side of not only me, but then also women having relationships and sisterhood. So this will not be the last time.
Well, good. I look forward to the next opportunity. I do want to thank you for this one. Like I mentioned before, I haven't had a platform to actually share my experience in quite some time. So being able to reflect upon it reminds me, even though I experienced it myself, it reminds me of how faithful God was to me during that period, and how faithful he continues to be to me.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you, Constance.
All right.
Enjoy your Christmas party.
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.